So Barry, I'm in the final stretches of preparation for going to India.
Oh boy.
This is my last session in country before I go. I go on Friday. So Friday is when I have to get on British Airways. And I don't know if you've ever been to India, but it takes like 35 or 36 hours to get there.
Yeah. I've been as far as Israel, and that's the farthest I've ever been from North America.
Well, from here, it's like 10 hours to Heathrow, and then 10 hours from London to Delhi, and then 2 hours from Delhi to my final location. And then there's a bunch of, waiting around in airports in between.
It's going to be brutal.
I've done it 4 or 5 times already.
Oh, well, you're a veteran. Seasoned veteran traveler.
That's why it doesn't make sense to just go for a week. You have to go for longer.
Yeah, big investment to get there back.
Yeah. Time, money, everything. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So how you been this week?
Oh, okay. I mean, I still have my occasional personality conflicts and kerfuffles that leave me scratching my head going, what the hell? But I'm getting better at walking away, determining that the optimal strategy is to walk away sooner rather than later. But there's more and more people that as a result, that I end up walking away from instead of, staying in the game to see if we can get to common ground. Sometimes it's just, there's no chance to get into common ground, at least not at my advancing age.
How many times a week do you go in?
Go into what?
To meet this lady.
Oh, no. The thing is that the last response was a week ago Friday. And I thought that was it. I thought we had just basically stopped communicating. And then yesterday, I got another barrage from her after a week delay, but I didn't respond to it. What I did is I transcribed the entire PM, the Google Voice SMS PM, and sent it to a mutual friend who is also a coach, a life coach, but he teaches nonviolent communication. That's his thing. And I haven't heard back from him because it's a lot to digest. But it really, I always had just a very distant transactional relationship anyway with this person. And now I don't even have that. It's just, I think it's a parting of the ways. And if it's repairable, I would be astonished.
Is the Toastmasters guy?
Well, the Toastmasters guy is the guy who knows us both. He's the guy. He's the president who also coaches nonviolent communication. And so I made him aware of it, and he looked at it, but he hasn't basically. I had some feedback from him already, but just preliminary. So, and then there was another one this week. Sam will appreciate. There's lots of people who have very negative opinions about organized religion. There are plenty of those. And even people who teach theology have negative opinions about organized religion. They point out that the theology, that's the core teachings, and the institutionalized religion can be miles apart. And it's very difficult to present the abstract theology when all the things that people are familiar with are the dumbed down and erratic elements that come through organized religious institutions, because theology is really graduate level thinking. The best of it is. And most people just basically are not receptive to that because it's over their head. Sam and I are in agreement on systems thinking, secular systems thinking. But the same kind of secular systems thinking was the same kind of thinking that the best theologians were using back, thousands of years ago. And I have to consider they were the pioneers of what we today would call systems thinking. Existential thinking, says Howard Gardner. thinking about practices which are survivable and sustainable. And some of those teachings got institutionalized into the church and ossified and dumbed down to the kindergarten level. Turned into dogma, which is not systems thinking is not about dogma. Although you can take some of the conclusions of systems thinking and turn them into rules of thumb, but they're not religious dogma. They're just our best thinking to date.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because that's actually what's been on my mind. I was thinking that I like coming to Sunday. I'll be honest, because I like Sam Chan, and it's an opportunity to speak with him. But I was thinking that tomorrow I may want to go back to church. I'm Jewish, but but let me explain why. So because I have no background, I want to be able to speak to people that know the doctrine at a higher level. So I'll just share with you an experience that I had. And I actually had this conversation with the, I don't even know what you call him, a preacher, the reverend, what was he? The minister. So the last time that I went to church, or the last time that I had a private conference with the minister, he had given a sermon, and it was about Jeremiah. And I don't even remember what the sermon was, but I do remember the conversation I had with him after, because I told him straight out, because there were parts I disagreed with. And I told him straight out, I said, I got to tell you, the whole time you were talking, I was hearing Jeremiah was a bullfrog, was a very good friend of mine. And he was awesome. I mean, that's why I even bother going. But I'd like to be able to have these conversations. And yesterday I thought, what a great, I have a friend who's very creative. He was raised in the church, but he's totally against it. And I was like, usually I can't have these conversations because you don't want to insult somebody.
Right.
So I don't want to be with somebody that's very religious, where if I go against them, I'm going to insult them. But then I can't have the conversation. And this particular person is a music person, and he has a good knowledge of the church, and he's against it. So I'm thinking he might be a good person to collaborate with. Well, wouldn't that be fun to like infuse music and make it, like a serious debate?
Yeah. I was just watching a couple of videos on YouTube by Eckhardt Tolle, T-O-L-L-E. He's a theologian who is not a big fan of the church. Mm-hmm. He's a big fan of the teachings of Jesus in the abstract, mm-hmm. but he's not happy with the way the church has turned them into dumbed down dogma, and failed to stimulate the kind of deep thinking that really he sees as the core of theological thinking, which I would consider overlapping with secular systems thinking. He says he could read passages of the New Testament, and he could tell a quote that was authentically a quote from Jesus, because it embodied deep thinking, versus some paraphrase of it by somebody who didn't really understand it and had turned it into something more dogmatic. And I never really studied the New Testament, and I wasn't really familiar with the teachings until I ran across the work of René Girard, the Stanford Emeritus Professor of Humanities. And Girard actually was an atheist in his youth, and he was, because he was Professor of Humanities, he was studying essentially the entire body of literature, the classics and history and scriptures and all kinds of literature. And he pulled out of all this human literature the core essence of what makes a really good story. And he had this model of competition, conflict, and violence, which is kind of a recurring structure in a lot of stories. And he realized that you can take this secular systems theoretic model of human sociocultural dynamics as exemplified in awful lot of stories. And if you wanted to not have the story run to tragedy, which a lot of them did, but run to congeniality and peace. If you wanted to run instead of having the thing escalate into a negative direction, if you want to de-escalate it, you could solve this model for ethical best practices to drive the story to common ground and peace. And he realized that solution to that model for the goal state of peace, nonviolence, equated to the teachings of the great theologians, not at least which is the New Testament, but not limited to the New Testament. So then he thought, oh, these teachings actually have some merit. But the problem is, it's like teaching the Pythagorean theorem and saying, behold the mathematical truth, take and believe, but not bothering to show you how it's constructed, not showing you the proof or the derivation. And to my mind, adopting a theorem, whether it's a theory in science or a theorem in mathematics, without understanding how'd you get it, that just says I have to take it on faith from the teacher. I don't want to take it on faith from them. I want you to know how you got it. I want to be able to construct the derivation with my own brain. And then I have a reason to believe it. And that's where Girard was. He worked this model of, when I saw this model, I go, no, I get it. I can see that the model makes good predictions. I can see I can solve the model for ethical best practices. If I solve for ethical best practices, I'm getting identical solutions as appears in at least some of the theologies.
But what you just said, that you want to see it and do it, when you're a little kid and you have that attitude, you're squashed. Not even a little kid. When being a young woman of 24, going into the teaching field, wanting to try things my own way, I was pounded for that. Whether I be stubborn or whatever those words might be. It's not easy.
I had the advantage that my father was a chemist, so he was basically educated in one of the sciences, and his career was in public health. And so I had a father who was, very positive on science. And I come from a Jewish culture where education is a very high value. And I got a lot of praise for doing well in school. And that was an aptitude. I could learn, I had an ability to learn and explain what I learned to my classmates when they couldn't understand. And so I didn't get squashed. But I think that's kind of rare, because even if you're a Jewish kid, it's unlikely your father is a scientist. More likely he's a businessman or something or a lawyer. Well,
I think some of it was the male. I think some of it was the male-female dynamic.
Yeah. Well, my mother, who only had a high school education, was very big on you had to follow the rules. Whatever the rules were, that was it. You had to, if you broke the rules, that was bad. And of course, in science, it's not rule-based. And that was a recurring theme that I really enjoyed in Harry Potter, that this thing about, in order to successfully solve the problem of the dysfunctional system, you have to break the rules. It's the rules that made the thing dysfunctional in the first place. And so I had this culture where it wasn't rule-driven. In science, it's not rule-driven. And I survived this culture where a lot of people, a lot of my peers, didn't have that freedom, didn't have that ability to, or that enabling subculture to evolve beyond rules to functional thinking. My mother didn't understand the mathematics that I was learning. She'd never learned calculus, but she at least appreciated that because I was learning advanced math, that was a good thing, even though she couldn't emulate the advanced math. She was so sort of down at she didn't even do algebra. So, but that was fine. She was very, I could learn cooking from her because she knew how to follow the rules of the cookbook, and I could follow her, making stuff in the kitchen. I could learn how to cook. And if you're following a recipe, you follow a recipe, because you don't know kitchen chemistry enough to make up your own recipes. Am I putting you to sleep? Your eyes are closing.
No. I'm just thinking, because I had been focused on there were some Facebook posts that were passing along some words of Carl Sagan, where with the Library of Alexandria, and right. One of the things though that I pulled out is how he mentions that, education was for the upper echelon, but, we talk about how, we question religion, but he also mentioned that the scientists and the, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the other sectors weren't checking their own, like the government wasn't checking what they were doing. Like I wound up watching a movie with Rachel Weisz from 2010 about Hypatia, because I didn't know the history. And for me, the easiest way is to watch the movie and then go back and find out what, if there were any inaccuracies. And all right, I know I'm going all around, but where I'm coming from really is that we have the hero's journey.
Yep.
Now we're hearing talk of the heroine's journey.
Yep.
The hero's journey being that going out into the world and facing the obstacles, the heroine's journey going inside. And I believe they were meant to be taken together every step of the way. And I feel like that's where collectively we're at now, where we have to really start questioning our values, why we did certain, like how to do it differently, and I see most people thinking about how they want things to be out there, but we're not looking at what do I have to do in this moment so that the next moment starts to look a little different.
Yep. Interesting about Hypatia. I had not heard of Hypatia until the 90s, when we began to inherit retired computers and put them into the schools. And so a friend of mine who was teaching philosophy at the time, it was a parochial college. There was a parochial college in I think it was in Newton. And he discovered that he could get a hold of some rather obsolete, but in the 90s, from the 80s, computer stuff. And so he recruited me to help refurbish this stuff and put it into the school, so that they could take the room that had typewriters and put computers in them instead of typewriters. And you weren't just typing on a computer. What do you got there?
Pastries? I only got it from the corner of my eye. Looks good.
But anyhow, so we put in these computers, and there was a little VAX computer about the size of a 2-drawer file cabinet that supported software not as elaborate as what we're using today on the social networks, but the early versions of it. And one of the faculty member was a nun named Sister Mary Ryan, lovely lady. And so she decided to put names on all of the units, all of the terminals. And she named all of the terminals after females in history, including those in the spiritual world and those in the academic world. And one of them was named Hypatia. And so I had all these little tags, on all these little, deck terminals and whatnot, named after these, role model females in both theology and history. And I don't remember them all, but I do remember that's the first time I heard the name Hypatia. And little by little, you sort of become aware of what these, who these people were and why they were revered as pioneers of intellectual work, whether it was spiritual work or theological work or library work, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that was really nice. And I loved working with Sister Mary Ryan. She was very intelligent, and she appreciated the fact that a lot of people had a very pediatric notion of religion. And so she would, from time to time confess to me, that it's okay to be skeptical of some of the dogma, because the way it's explained to children is very, simplified. And at the college level, you grow out of that. And if you go into like Boston university has a school of, it's not called a school of theology. What's it called? I forget the exact title of it, but Elie Wiesel was in that department, famous Jewish theologian, and they also had weekly Christian services, non-denominational. And I used to they played them on WBUR because WBUR is at the Boston University, so it's the same. So they would broadcast the Sunday worship service, and the dean of the school would give a sermon. You can hear it on the radio every Sunday morning. And I loved his sermons because they were intellectual. They weren't dogmatic at all. They were deep reasoning. And I learned a lot by listening to those. And I never felt that I was being, sort of rigidly dogmatized into, some particular church. But that's at the college level. That's at the graduate level.
You said something interesting in one of your comments, and this may not have been how you meant it, but it stuck with me for a different reason. And you said how some people are stuck, they can only think in terms of scripts.
Yes, I remember that.
And so the way that hit me, though, is that the reason I don't mind speaking to people who are very dogmatic, as a matter of fact, I like it. I don't try to change their script, but I attempt to show them a different way to say their lines.
Yep.
And that's why I get upset when I hear people attacking religion, because they can't change their script. So to keep trying to pull the script away, to me, is more harmful. Not just you, there's a whole world of people like that. Yeah. And for me, it makes more sense. Okay, this is what they're capable. They have to work within their script. There's 100 different ways to say, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? You know what I mean? I would rather do it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I would look at a script that was written for an audience, say 1,000 or 2,000 or even 3,000 years ago, and the script was written because that's their audience. And I would say, how would I take a script like that and rewrite it today for a modern 21st century audience who has a level of education that's sort of, range, maybe not graduate school, but, at least, high school, college level, so that I'm not over their heads, but I'm also not talking down to them like they're in kindergarten. And it's a nice exercise to try to rewrite scripts so that they are read as literature, maybe allegories or parables or fables or novels, short stories, that even though they're fiction, even though they're made up, even though they're synthetic stories, that is, they're fiction, there's a truth built into the structure of the story, that they represent a model, represent a generic model of some aspect of human behavior that is independent of the fact that the story itself has got made up characters and made up location and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I've had to learn is that if I try to express theory where I'm at the graduate level of mathematical abstract theory, I've lost 95% of my audience. And the best scientists that I know of have learned how to take the abstract science and make a story that doesn't do a disservice to the science, but reveals it to the general audience. And that's quite a skill. That's a pedagogical skill that I wish I had and had been trained in much earlier in life, because I never really got very good at it. I've written a few allegories and parables, but they're kind of, they're like elevator music. They don't really do the job the way I wish they did. But I've read some that are fabulous.
Sam's hand is up.
Go ahead, Sam.
So it may go a bit unrecognized, but I do try multiple different ways into this conversation about dogma and religion and unfounded beliefs. And so I do try a number of different things. What does come across, however, as stridency is a sense of urgency, that there is damage being caused by beliefs in, unfounded models, stories that don't have much substantive reasoning behind them,
redeeming
even
value.
not very useful stories. And the sense of urgency is because the more people believe that truth is not valuable, the more crap gets done to this planet and to our society. And if we believe we have to minimize the crap, minimize the damage, really get onto a good path, time is of the essence. So it's not necessarily that I expect to convince anyone who is dogmatically, unwilling to accept science and reasoning. It's that when I do this, I'm communicating to others, not the direct person that I'm actually, apparently communicating with. And those others, hopefully, are the side effect of some of these interactions. So I don't have any misguided belief that I'm going to change anyone's mind, anyone who's already dogmatic. But I do want to be able to reach the people who can observe what's really going on.
Yeah.
I think that the young generation, for example, it's been well documented. They are abandoning religion and religious institutions, and religious, attendance is declining. That's what I've read.
It's true.
So I do think that, more and more, this is this is happening, it's spreading. And I think, people are rejecting this story without foundation. And that's a sign for optimism, but it's not happening quickly enough, as far as I can tell.
I agree, it's not happening. I mean, critical thinking skills are way below what they need to be. And the question is, how do we elevate critical thinking skills among the general population? Not just scientific critical thinking, but all kinds of critical thinking in all kinds of disciplines. If you want to train somebody to be a scientist, you have to encourage them, make a hypothesis and test it. Now, 19 out of 20 hypotheses are wrong. They're not the right model. And you have to let people construct a hypothesis, articulate a hypothesis, and then go through the exercise of testing it and attempting to falsify it. And this failure to attempt to falsify your pet belief is how you get dogma that's baloney. And you need to do it both in science education and in secular education, is that if you have a working hypothesis, test it in a way that will reveal its falsehood if it is false, and not end up causing a lot of damage because you're acting on a belief. This is what politicians do all the time. They will pass a law based on a theory or a belief that's baloney, and then cause a lot of damage, and they don't do science. That's the difference between policy developed by something like operations research versus policy, basically politics. You adopt a philosophy, and then you act as if it's the ground truth, and you construct controls accordingly, and they don't work. And I think that's the urgency and the emergency that our culture faces. Certainly in my lifetime.
I like what you just did there, Barry. Urgency and emergency.
Right. Yeah. I mean, more and more people are worrying about the collapse of civilization. I mean, things like sustainability or unsustainable practices and the possibility. When I was my 20s or 30s, that was not a topic of discussion. There was no real concern about it. You had it, okay.
No, wait, I'm not saying I had it.
Oh,
I'm saying, because I lived with my dad for many years, my dad already had it when he was like in his 30s and 40s, because he thinks like a mathematician.
right.
He extrapolates, from 0 to 1 to infinity.
Your dad is about
And
my
so
age.
he was the very first to really establish like very green practices before all of these terms were coined, even before all of these studies about global temperatures rising, even before any of that. He was just thinking okay, if I'm producing this much crap and if I'm wasting this much whatever, what is that doing to the planet? He was thinking on a micro scale and then doing the extrapolation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And he did that because that's the way he thinks. Okay.
Yep.
And so I would say there are a number of people who actually saw this, not in any global observation sense, but just looking at themselves as tiny little microsystems.
Yep. Yep.
And that's a way of thinking that I see is unfortunately quite rare.
Yeah. I learned the word ecology from my father, but I think I was probably in my 40s before he used the word ecology. And then I, every time I learn a new word, I, pay attention to what it means. I didn't know about ecology until my dad brought up the topic. And that had to be, well, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago.
What does your dad do, Barry? I don't think I've heard very much about that.
So he had a bachelor's in chemistry from Omaha University. And he taught chemistry for a while at Creighton University, which happens to be a Catholic university in Omaha. And then he really began his career in the Omaha Douglas County Health Department. So he was called a sanitarian, which is somebody who is concerned about all the public health issues that government's responsible for. So, for example, the health department was responsible for milk sanitation, restaurant sanitation, and stuff like that. And my father, for most of his career, would visit the local dairy farms to make sure that the milk supply was up to standard, so you weren't going to end up with a bad milk. And the health department sent him back to get a master's in public health at Tulane when I was in 7th grade. So he was applied chemistry and public health, and then he taught public health occupations at a community college in Iowa until he retired. So he went to what became known as Kirkwood Community College and developed the whole program there in public health occupations. He lived to be 84. He died in the mid-90s at the age of 84. But I always respected him as a practicing scientist and an educator. He was both a scientist and an educator. And he had gotten as high as a master's degree in public health. And of course, it was very useful to have a father who was, in the sciences and in education, and that made it much easier for me to pursue a career that was rich in educational opportunities and higher levels of scholarship.
Thanks for that little detour, Barry. So I was going to do a little bit of a personal check-in because my daughter, and then I'll go back to this topic, by the way, because my daughter knows that on Friday I'm going to India for a month. She and her friend, her roommate, her housemate, and their 2 dogs decided to visit this weekend. So they came yesterday. They're going to stay 2 nights, and then they're going to leave on Sunday. But they wanted to make me cookies. So they made me about huge batch. This is just a small part of it.
So those are cookies.
These are lemon curd, lemon flavored shortbread cookies. So they were in the kitchen for hours. This is not from some kind of a pre-mix. They actually made the powdered sugar themselves, it turns out. They made the curd themselves. They made the lemon zest, of course that was easy. But anyway, they spent a long time doing this, and it was fun, not just because they were doing it and they were doing it, to help me, but we were actually interacting for quite a bit, for hours while they were doing this. It was kind of fun. And my daughter, and her friend come and and do this, and we're going to go out. I think one of their favorite outings is to go out for hot pot. So we're probably going to go out for hot pot later tonight. Anyway, that's kind of cool.
You won't be able to take those cookies on an international flight, will you?
I could probably take a few, but they made, just a
they're
huge
very,
batch.
very strict these days about what foods you can take that you didn't buy in the airport.
Okay. I just got triggered. I got to tell you what happened last week for me going through TSA. Okay. When I go to the Bay Area, one of my favorite side trips is to go to this place called Saratoga Bagels. I know it's on the record. I'm advertising for them, not being compensated. Okay, whatever. I just love it because it's my favorite bagel place for decades. ever since the late 80s, actually, not early 90s, late 80s, when I moved into Saratoga. So they have what probably is a very simple thing. They mix honey with cream cheese, and they sell it by these little, I don't know what size these are, maybe half-pound little containers, plastic containers. And it's probably easy to make, but I just go there and I support them. I like it. I spread it on my bagels, and it's really yummy. They have a number of different flavors, and so cream cheese purists probably think this is a bad idea, but I just like it. So when I go back there, I like to get bagels. I like to get some of this, flavored cream cheese. And I've been able to do this for half a year, except last week, TSA stops me and says, "What's this?" I said, "This is honey cream cheese." They said, "You cannot take this with you." And I said, "Why? It's not a liquid. I've been doing this for half a year. Why are you stopping me now?" And they said, "No, it's considered a gel." But I said, "What is a gel? This is not a gel. This is cream cheese." They said, "If you can spread it on bread, it's considered a gel, and you cannot take more than 3 or whatever
Rules.
whatever of it."
Dogmatic
And I had
rules.
bought 3 of these things at $7 a piece, and they confiscated all of it. And I said, "Hey, I'm willing to eat this in front of you to show that it's not damaging and it's whatever." Okay. They said, "Nope, we have to take this." And I said, "Please don't waste it. At least eat it yourself. Enjoy it. Don't just throw it away." I said, "No, we cannot do that. We have to throw it away."
Yep.
So I'm finally on the record. I can release this off my chest and say, I am peeved with TSA probably for the first time. I understand their job. Okay. But this is the first time I thought this is going beyond the bounds of stupidity here. Okay.
Yep.
To take away my cream cheese and stuff I've been doing for half a year already.
Yeah. Bureaucracy.
Anyway,
Bureaucracy.
sorry for that aside. I know I'm wasting your time. That I
Yeah.
got off my chest.
Bureaucrats are like that. They can't afford to bend the rules because they can lose their job, and they know they can lose their job, so they enforce the rules. And even if they know that this is stupid, they don't really feel like they have the freedom to be lenient.
Yeah. And by the way, by the time this incident was over, it's probably lasted maybe only 2 or 3 minutes, but it felt like half an hour. Okay. There were like 6 of them already talking to me. Okay. They'd drawn the attention of so many of these TSA agents. And okay, let me calm down.
I wrote a song parody about TSA way back at the beginning when it all started up. In fact, it's up on my blog if you want to see it. It's a funny riff. Let me see if I can find it. I don't, so long as I can't even remember it now. But let's just find it here.
By the way, Barry, at Stanford, I think the department's called the Department of Religious Studies.
At Stanford, I forget what it's called at Boston University. It might be School of Theology. I'm not really sure now.
There's a peripherally related department. I don't know if it was there when you were there, called VTS. Do you remember what VTS was?
BTS? VTS?
VTS.
At BU or at Stanford?
No, at Stanford.
This is a department?
It was a degree. Yes, it was a degreed department, but it was self-designed. And it was called Values, Technology, and Society. So you could actually do the intersection of this, think about social issues, and actually design your own degree if you could get a professor to actually sponsor you to do that.
There was a branch of the IEEE that had a journal with roughly that title. I can't remember the exact title, but I don't think the word values was in it, but something comparable. It was sort of a broad view of, interaction and everything. I found one of my articles, but it's not the right one.
Okay, so let me go on record as a possible dream, okay, is that if I were to go back and get a degree, see, when I went there the first time, I was just trying to concentrate on the T part, okay? I didn't really feel ready to go to the VTS combination of things. But if I were to go back, I would try and get a program around collaborology and get it done in that VTS department and try and get that sponsored, That's what I would do
Yeah.
in a dream of mine. Over. Hey,
I'm getting to
Josh.
the point where I can't even remember my own work anymore.
I was just wondering, Sam, if you could still, you don't have to be a student and go back and get another degree, if you could still do that at Stanford as alumni.
It's a good question. I might want to check in on that.
You know, just chat up some of the people in those organizations inside of Stanford.
Yeah.
'Cause maybe they go, you know what, we've been looking for you, Sam. We've been waiting for you to come and kick this off. You never know. It's worth a shot.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, because ever since I encountered it, I thought, I can't even do one degree in one of these areas. How can I do all three and make sense out of it, without being very, very shallow? That was my first thought when I first encountered it. But maybe after a few decades, one feels ready to sort of ask those questions.
I found it. This is a takeoff on a poem, and I forget whose poem it's a takeoff on, but it's called In Sensoriam. In Sensoriam. With mighty wands and scans we watch, and trust beloved fondling paw. Our nature dread in truth and law, with daring peek upon your crotch. That's when they were warning what you were hiding in your pants.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for that warning, Barry, because you're right. I probably will experience even different practices at international travel and flights.
Yeah. Turns out I wrote another one. This is Barry Manilow, I think. It's not unusual to be groped by TSA. It's not unusual to have fun with TSA. But when my junk is hanging about with TSA, it's not unusual to hear me sigh, oh, I want to fly. There's a whole song that's based on, it's not unusual. It's the same.
That's Tom Jones, not Barry Manilow.
Yeah.
You're right. It's Tom Jones. Yeah, yeah. So what's the date on that? I mean, it goes back more than 10 years, I think. Forget when all that happened. I guess it was right after 9/11 that all that started.
Yo, God.
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, there's a popular thing going around where you create the image of Tom Jones using like Stable Diffusion. So or you could just grab a picture of Tom Jones, or you could grab a picture of anyone you want, or make up a person that doesn't exist. Go to This Is Not a Real Person, and you can animate now their facial structure from the picture.
Right.
And then you can copy the voice of Tom Jones if you wanted to, and then you can have the words of Barry Court. So you can really make that parody like a deep fake of Tom Jones singing "Not unusual to get groped by anyone," and it's quite powerful. I'm just saying I have a little tutorial on YouTube if you want me to send it, Barry.
Yeah, well, we're talking about stuff that was done, what is it, 13 years ago, when I wrote these send-ups of the TSA. I've got, I think there was 3 or 4 of them that I produced in that time frame. But yeah,
just why not? I don't know. You can put your parodies out there and bring them to life.
yeah. Unfortunately,
voice.
I never perform them because I don't have a singing voice. I can't carry a tune.
Well, that's what I'm saying is there's new technology now where they take the voice of Tom Jones, and he'll be singing it in his voice.
Yeah. At this point, I think it's sort of old news, but
Hey, it's a meme.
yeah. Sam.
So someone might know, but I don't know. I heard a reference that early on, decades ago, like probably 50 or 60 years ago, some very famous woman, probably a singer, recorded all of her phonemes very, very accurately using very, very good audio, so that in the future, probably now, they could actually use her voice and her phonemes to actually synthesize her speaking a number of these things. So I forget who this was, though. Maybe one of you guys remember who this was.
I don't know the story, but yeah.
Somebody famous.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the meme copy pasta?
Yeah.
My kids, of course. Also.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's getting popular.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned a lot of the latest trend and stuff from my kids, especially Ronnie. Yeah, that's actually something. Go ahead, Barry.
I was just going to say the whole thing about writing these song parodies, they're therapeutic for me. They don't change the world. They're just my therapy. Like, you know, I get it off, just like Sam getting it off his chest. You know, it processes the misadventure to the point where I can let it go.
That's what Weird Al Yankovic said probably in college, and then look where he is now.
Right, exactly. Well, of course, he had a lot more. First of all, he could sing, and he could do the performances. I only wrote one of my song parodies is I write the songs, and the whole point is I only write the lyrics. I don't actually perform them or generate the music.
Well,
I just write the song.
That's why I'm trying to tell you. They got the technology now. You can do it. You can have anyone you want sing any song of anything you wrote.
Yeah, but
why?
Entertainment.
Well, yeah.
So I can go, that was funny. Nice job, Barry. That made my day. It made me smile. It was a little.
As far as I know, nobody's ever taken me up on the offer to perform any one of my song parodies. I think I've written something like 200 of them. But a lot of them have to do with specific incidents that happen, you know, kind of obscure incidents. They're not that generic.
Well, I did want to use your talent, but it wasn't going to be for entertainment because I think we have enough entertainment. So I'm with you. I like the idea that you do it for therapy, but to move it and further along for the reason just being entertainment, I don't think that would be a good use of time. But I was hoping Sam would come back on because I really wanted to ask him a question. So maybe I'll wait.
Yeah, I'm here. I was just going to go refresh my coffee, but I'll wait.
Oh, okay. I just want to know what would be the reason? And again, I'm just trying to, again, the conversation is a little shallow and I just want to get a little bit deeper. And I want to know what would be the reason that you would want to get the degree in collaborology? How would having that degree change your life?
It would actually establish it as a respectable or worthwhile pursuit that others could then investigate.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Thank you.
When I got finally my PhD from Stanford, I would tell people, you know, what's a PhD good for? I said that and 25 cents will buy you half a cup of coffee.
Well, the other reason I wanted to ask the question is this goes to Barry, what you were saying about hypotheses, and we don't, you know, they don't get tested out. Right. I could have just assumed that I knew why he wanted that degree, made a totally wrong assumption.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So,
and that's why, as you know, I'm not a big fan of theories of mind. I know that when people do theories of mind on me, they're way off the mark. And I presume that if I try to do a theory of mind on somebody else, that I'm way off the mark. And the few times that I've attempted it, I've, you know, confirmed that. You take an 80 billion neural network. It's a very complex system. Trying to come up with a reliable characterization of it, good grief. I mean, how hubristic, how arrogant is that?
Right, but if you were working with the person, going one step at a time to confirm, to question, confirm, question, confirm.
Yes, you can do it. If you can do it with their cooperation, that's what, to some extent, that's what a psychotherapist does, or any kind of a counselor, is they will talk you through a whole litany over weeks or months or even years, and pretty soon they'll put together a characterization that's reasonable diagnosis. They can even tell you what page of DSM is the one that closest to your personality. I was just saying the other day, imagine a world where everybody were apprised of what page of DSM-5 that was the closest match to them was, and that was revealed. I mean, imagine somebody said, "Oh, Stacy, take a look at this page of DSM. That's you, more than any other page." I mean, that would be quite a remarkable thing. But of course, those are generally considered private diagnoses if you bother to go see a shrink and get one.
Well, the point that I'm trying to move towards is that in the groups that I'm in, where we're working towards collaboration, and we're looking to create spaces where we work better with each other, one of the things that really helps in building relationships is where we feel safe enough to start asking the questions that normally we wouldn't ask. Now, sometimes we just think it's an obvious answer, and it's really not.
Yeah.
So part of that has to do with leaving space, and people aren't just jumping in and speaking. So part of it is just simply slowing down. The other part is the way we listen. This is something that Doug Breitbart used to talk about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Gertrude was actually pretty good at eking out where somebody was at in the moment. Not that that was their personality, that's where they were in the moment. She was pretty good at that. I consider myself terribly poor at that, determining where somebody's headspace is in the moment or in general, unless it's extreme. I mean, if it's very extreme, then it's, you know, it's undeniable. Somebody's screaming their head off at you, you can tell they're angry, but it has to be, you know, pretty high level. Even laughing. I mean, when people laugh, you can't tell if it's a nervous laugh or an authentic laugh. You know what?
And you can't tell if they're purposely faking it
Exactly.
or it's
That's the whole point.
accidental. Well, this is why I'm always saying how important honesty is for me.
Yep.
Not about truth, honesty.
Yeah, or candor. Yeah, candor and honesty, sort of slightly nuanced variations of the same thing.
Yeah.
Sam.
I'm including in here a possibly negative sounding pet peeve, which is I do encounter in some of these groups people who claim they intuit well where someone is in their thoughts, their feelings, their mental models. And I find sometimes those don't go verified and those just go as claims. I see that quite a bit.
Yeah, and often if you want to deny it, they won't believe your denial.
I don't see that. I mean, I know that I do that sometimes, but other than me, I don't see other people doing it. So if you're speaking about me, then I'll
I'm not
say.
speaking about you, I'm speaking a lot of other groups. You do follow up.
I think I only have maybe 3 or 4 correspondents who can read me correctly and disclose their reading, and they're on the mark. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people in 78 years. Well, maybe I shouldn't consider my pre-teens in that collection, but you know, when I'm old enough to be conscious of my own frame of mind.
If there's no room for questions and answering, then I don't see how it really can happen.
Yeah. The most ironic example is that when I was a supervisor at Bell Labs, that was about the time that we were beginning not only to have women at Bell Labs, but women in the supervisory roles. And I had a peer supervisor in the adjacent department. And she was, her degree was in psychology. She was doing behavioral psychology because of human factors engineering. And sometimes she said to me, she says, Barry, she says, I consider myself very good at reading facial expressions and body language and all that kind of stuff. She says, I look at you, she says, I haven't a clue. I have no idea where your head is. And I could stare at your face and not get an idea. And I remembered that for a long time until it occurred to me that my default emotional state is to be vexed and perplexed. And then I go, holy shamoly, she was vexed and perplexed, and she didn't even realize that she was in a perfect state of empathy with me. But there you have it. I mean, she was, you know, she got the same feeling, perplexed, and didn't say, I'm vexed and perplexed when I look at you. Are you vexed and perplexed? It took a decade for those 2 words to somehow come out of the ether. So that was sort of one of these, you know, and most people are not in the same state I'm in. Why would they be?
Well, the other thing that I see missing a lot is curiosity. I think most people come into these conversations and they're not so much curious as to what's going on as they are of what they want to bring and what they want to say.
Yep. Yep. They want to deliver their script. And you know, one of the plurals of script is scriptures. Scriptures is a collection of scripts. Literally, that's what the word means. Canonical scripts, collection of sort of high level, high valued scripts, at least within some community or culture. Did you, by the way, Stacey, did you see that I wrote a second song parody about the person?
No, if it's on Facebook, no, I haven't been spending a lot of time on Facebook other than a couple of the things like, that Carl Sagan thing led me on the Hypatia trail.
Yeah.
So then I wound up watching the movie and got into other things.
Yeah. So I wrote 2 song parodies in the last, 2 or 3 weeks, which is, there was a long hiatus where I didn't have any compulsion to write any. And then in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I had at least 2 encounters that were bad enough that I needed to either write an essay or write a couple of song parodies to process them. By the way, the one I wrote on model-based reasoning got quite a lot of response. And there's also a lot of stuff coming out on metacognition, which is encouraging. Critical thinking, metacognition. There's more and more people who are beginning to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I know when my friend Chris was in over the summer, he was all of a sudden, he wanted to know everything about mental models.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's the general population, stepping up a notch in, general abstract learning. I just, this morning I went on to YouTube to see what there was on metacognition. And I think there was maybe half a dozen videos that touched on metacognition, but they didn't really go into much depth. They were just kind of very short surveys of, what it's about, but not tools for thought of metacognition, just, the framework for doing it. But I think it's coming. I keep hoping some of these superstars like Hank Green or Grant Sanderson will pick up some of this material and take it to the next level of college level depth. So
I don't know. I don't know either one of those superstars' names. I don't know who they are.
Well, this is probably not the place to try to spell it out for you, but
okay.
Hank Green is the one guy that if there was anybody I would like to be other than myself, it would be Hank Green. He's the person I'd most like to be if I were him. To put it, that's how I put it. and actually, I had featured something that Hank Green had produced, and I wrote as a comment, Hank Green is the person I would most like to be if I were him. And one of my readers passed that on to Hank Green.
What is he a what is he?
He's a young YouTube presenter whose thinking is very similar to my own, but much younger, much more energetic, much better communicator. He's one of the presenters of this PBS Crash Courses series on YouTube.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll look him up.
Yeah, so, and he and his brother are called the Vlog Brothers because they actually began by video blogging each other every, each one a week. So they got to be famous as for their video blogs, and then they started doing these crash course stuff.
Okay.
But I really fell in love with him when I saw him hosting these PBS video crash courses on lots of subjects.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I will look it up.
Yeah. His brother's John Green, Hank and John Green, the Vlog Brothers. John's the older, Hank is the younger, and the older one is more of a liberal arts kind of guy, and Hank is more the technology and sciencey kind of guy.
I think I've heard of the Vlog Brothers, but I just didn't hear.
Well, Hank is the younger of the two.
Yeah, it reminds me of Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein. They're the blog brothers, the other blog brothers.
Them I know.
Yeah.
See, even though I have a brother, my brother is very different from me. He's a businessman. He's not into science. He's not into, anything like, my areas. So although, we have a cordial relationship, we don't really have a collaborative relationship. He'll call me, on his weekend and to say hello, but we don't have that much in common. Whereas the Hank and John Green, they feed off each other. They collaborate, and each one induces the other to do better thinking. And I've had people like that. My friend Nancy Matlack Williams back in the 90s, and Anne Marie, we can riff off of each other, but there's so few people, and I don't have any blood relatives that like that I collaborate with. Systems thinking is pretty rare, and even people who know of it may not be that evolved into the depth of systems thinking. They kind of be just kind of armchair systems thinkers.
I think there are a lot of systems thinkers that don't know they're systems thinkers, though.
That's true, because what Howard Gardner calls the ninth intelligence or existential intelligence, that's the kind of thinking that supports systems thinking. But most of the applications of systems thinking are in narrow disciplines. And so they don't use the term systems thinking. They'll use a different term for the application of it. And they don't realize that they're using the same kind of thinking as somebody in a seemingly unrelated discipline.
Would you categorize, Barry, first principles thinking as thinking, or is that separate to you?
I'm sure that they overlap quite a bit. Now, whether they're distinct, well, if you're getting to the roots, yeah, I think systems thinking tries to get down to the roots. Why things are the way they are. So yeah, certainly Feynman would talk a lot about first principles. In fact, the first principle in the Protocols of the Scientific Method is do not fool yourself. You're the easiest person to be fooled. And he called that the first principle. That was in his commencement address at Caltech, I don't know, back in the 70s, I think it was. So yeah, and so I relate to Feynman, I relate to Sagan, I relate to scientists who work at the foundations, axiomatic, the people who go to the axiomatic foundations of their discipline and say, why do we adopt these axioms, and how do we know that we're not fooling ourselves by adopting false axioms?
That's an important first step.
Yeah, and very few people will bother to question the axiomatic foundations of a discipline. And even in some disciplines, they actually call them a dogma. There's the central dogma of cell biology. And they call it, that's literally what they call it, the central dogma. And it basically defines what the fundamental belief is of the role of DNA. How the cause and effect chain goes. And a lot of people think that the word dogma only applies to religious dogma, but you'll find the same word dogma used in the sciences. It's already used in molecular biology, and I've seen it used elsewhere. And so if you're going to adopt a dogma, that is a set of axioms, you want to say, is there any reason to doubt any of these axioms? How do we know that we're not making a mistake adopting these axioms? And Sam will tell you, his father will say, if any of the foundational axioms of mathematics are wrong, the whole system will collapse. And that's one of the reasons the systems do collapse, is they're built on dogmas that are not tested.
And they should.
Said Linus.
No, but actually, interesting case. You probably know the case. You know what's the difference between lines and points?
Yeah, dimensions.
In theory, they could be interchangeable and you'd still have plane geometry.
That I don't know that I've ever seen that perspective. But there is something
A
called
line connects
duality.
2 points. A point also intersects 2 lines.
Yeah,
You can take
Yeah, that's-
those notions and build all of geometry exactly the same way.
yeah, that's dual. Yeah, duality theory says that for every system you can find its dual, which is fundamentally the same content, but everything is replaced by its opposite or its complement. And actually, my PhD was in application of duality theory. A good example of duality theory is if you look at a phonograph record and you see the grooves, which is the amplitude of the sound, and then you look at MP3, which is the Fourier transform, or you look at the sheet music. The sheet music is the dual of the audio, and vice versa. They're Fourier transforms of each other. There's a math. Yeah, I know it's a little bit sloppy.
Transform. I'll go with transform.
Yeah.
The notion of dual means there's only one other, which I think is incomplete.
Yeah. So another duality is analytic geometry. So the picture of the parabola is the dual or the analog of the
equation.
formula of the equation. So a lot of systems have their dual representations that you can represent it in one form or the other, and they're interchangeable without loss of information.
That
And that's
is the
very
key
powerful.
insight. I'm so excited I interrupted you, Barry. That's a key insight behind language.
Yep.
You have to understand that language has multiple different references, and understanding that this reference can be mapped to that reference in a number of ways is part of intelligence. It's
Yeah.
part of recognition. Recognition is the unrecognized, unidentified, taken for granted component of intelligence.
Yeah, Laplace and Fourier transforms, which are a deep subject in applied mathematics, are sort of the premier examples of the duality. And if you don't learn those, you've really, glossed over a very, very powerful set of deep thinking, deep reasoning principles. And people who get it, they invent MP3, for example, or all kinds of technologies that rely on these transformations.
Yeah.
The fact that you've got a picture on your screen and that picture is sent as a signal sequentially, that's another example of a transform.
You know what I consider the most basic foundational domain that is this area we're talking about right now? Is information theory.
Yes, exactly.
I think, unfortunately, even too many computer science programs, in my opinion, don't contain an aspect of information theory.
Yeah. Well,
Information theory came out of, double E, and only was later recognized as key to computer science.
Yeah.
So I can find lots of people that are practicing programmers who haven't really learned much about information theory.
I was 2 years old when Claude Shannon wrote the first paper on information theory at Bell Labs. And I didn't really learn very much about Claude Shannon's information theory until I was at Bell Labs, 30 years later, or well, maybe not 30, 20 years later.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of very, very insightful developments at Bell Labs, which are purely mathematical.
So homologs that can map
Right.
a model to another model, or an
Right.
expression to another expression, or an equation to another equation, or a story to a scientific
Right there.
phenomenon,
Yep.
that mapping, that transform,
Right.
that isness, is a very deep idea. The word is probably the most complicated word in language.
Yeah.
The most complicated notion in language is is.
Information preserving transformations from one representation to another, but the same information you can you can map it either back and forth without loss of information. That's a
And
really
it's even
powerful-
key to know which direction loses information.
Yeah.
Because that's key to this diffusion stuff. Okay. That relies on how much information you can lose and still have something useful.
Right. Color television made big use of that. How much of the picture and the colors you can throw away, and from the human eye, it doesn't matter. And they threw away everything that the human eye basically doesn't process. And they threw away, I think, 2/3 of the information that the camera was getting.
Well, we're already looking at just a very narrow spectral band compared to what we could be perceiving.
Well,
So
that's
2/3 out of a very small is even smaller, but irrelevant, seems.
But that's what makes
Yeah.
the technology affordable. You determine what you can throw away. Go ahead, Joshua.
I was just saying, I asked ChatGPT to explain information theory as if I was an 8th grader. And
Was
said,
it good?
I was going to ask you if it's good. It says, imagine you're playing a game where you have to guess a secret number. If the number is between 1 and 10, it would be easier to guess the correct number than if the number was between 1 or 100. The bigger the range of possible numbers, the more information is needed to guess the correct one. Information theory is a way of measuring how much information is needed to give a correct answer or understanding a message or data.
It doesn't talk about the game of 20 questions, does it?
It's partial. It's good in a partial notion, yes.
Yeah.
I just
see,
asked it to explain it to me as if I was an 8th grader. I can
so
go
turn around and
deeper.
turn around and ask GPT, how does that relate to the children's game of 20 questions, and why 20 in 20 questions?
Okay, give me a second. I only have 2 fingers. How does that relate to the game of 20 questions?
Yeah. And why is it,
And why?
and why is it 20 and it's not some other number?
Well, should we ask it just how does it relate and then ask that next question?
You could do it whichever way you like. I don't know.
Let's
whether-
try. How does that relate to the game? See if it knows what the game of 20 questions is.
Oh, it'll know the game. There's no question about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it knows the game. And then the next question you wanted to ask is why?
What did it
Why
say?
why is it called 20 and not some other number of questions?
Why is it called 20?
Why is it built around the number of questions being exactly 20 and not 3 questions or 17 questions or 122 questions? I mean, why 20?
Okay. So while Josh is looking at that, I used to play this game with my kids. And it turned out to be a running family joke. Every time we played this 20 questions game, my kid's first question would be, is it a toilet?
Is it animal, vegetable, or mineral? Is it bigger than a bread box? You learn to ask questions that divide the space roughly in half with each question.
That's
It
actually
says,
playing the game trying to optimize, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says the number 20 was chosen because it's a relatively large number, which allows for a wide range of objects to be guessed, but not so large that the game would take an unreasonable amount of time to play.
Yeah. Now, the question is, does it realize that the 20 is the number of bits?
No, it's not. It's not saying that. It doesn't really, it says it's not a hard and fast rule to limit the question to 20. It's more like a tradition or a convention. It does not realize that.
Yeah.
Wait, Barry, it's number of bits. Can you finish that sentence, please?
Yeah. So, for example, in information theory, a bit is the answer to one yes/no question. So you ask a question to which you can get a yes or a no. That yes or no is one bit of information. So how many questions, how many yes/no questions do you need to ask to narrow down anything in the universe to exactly one item? 20 bits. 20 questions that are carefully chosen should be able to identify any single object in the universe within the
Well,
scope
where
of
did
what
the number 20 come from, though?
That's
because
what Barry's trying to explain.
the point is that 20 bits of information is the number of bits it takes to name something specifically and rule everything else out,
Roughly.
roughly.
Can't be done in less?
Sometimes
It basically
can.
identifies about 1 million different buckets.
Yeah.
That's
So
all.
you ask yourself, how many different things can a person have knowledge or awareness of? And it's about 2 to the 20th. After that, it's indistinguish it,
Well, it was when the game was created, but maybe not now. Maybe it's
Well,
21 questions.
yeah, I mean,
I'm just saying, because there's a lot more, how much knowledge has been created since that game was created?
you
How
can
many
ask,
more things?
how many different concepts or things can a human have distinct awareness of without, merging them together into one category? And the answer is nominally to the 20th, roughly. And
Traditionally,
if you ask the questions efficiently, you can narrow it down in a minimum number of questions. Each one resolves your uncertainty. Where you want to ask a question where you're not expecting always a yes or always a no. You want to ask a question where you're roughly in the middle. It's 50-50 as far as you know. So that resolves the maximum, it throws away, roughly half of the space.
right? You're halving the entire universe until you
Right.
get to.
Not the
Yeah, I
entire
got it.
universe. Not the entire. That's the key.
Entire space of
Well,
things people
It's
can.
the space of things that
universe of
you
things.
think your game partner is aware of.
Yeah.
Right,
That's all. Okay.
right.
So in other words, they're not going to think about Procyon versus Tau Centauri. Okay. But they're going to think about a bread box versus a refrigerator. Okay.
Right.
So that's the key aspect. It's got to be, some knowledge of you and the player that you're with.
If I'm thinking of a neutrino, I may not be able to play this game with somebody who hasn't had at least some college physics, because they have no idea what, there's a word that they don't know what it means.
No, I play this game all the time. That's actually a little pastime, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you play it with your daughter, you have to consider, what is she aware of? What are the things that she has a name for that she knows what the name refers to? And so so for a child, it's probably a lot less than 20 questions, but a child will not ask efficiently. And information is what's the fewest number of questions you have to ask. And that's where Claude Shannon basically was working. That was his first principles. He wanted an alphabet where each new letter resolved your uncertainty of the message by nominally the same amount. If you could predict the next letter that's going to come on the telegraph, what's the point of sending it? You want to be able to send a signal on the telegraph that the next signal resolves your uncertainty by the greatest amount possible, so that you can send the fewest number of signals to send the message.
Yeah, I see that in predictive text at the bottom when you're typing on an iPhone.
Exactly. And so the iPhone is predicting what's the next word or letter, fragment going to be. And the idea is that, it's only going to learn anything if you say something completely off the limits of what it's anticipating. Then again, that's when you get a lot of information. Oh, I knew you were going to say that. Well, I didn't get any information when you said it. I was very confident that's what it was going to be.
Yeah, repatterning language and speech in a way that creates something new.
Right. And a lot of the conversations on the social networks, it's just same old, same old. How often do you learn something new? I remember when as a kid, I come home from school, dinner, father would say, "What did you learn at school today, Barry? What did you learn on Facebook today, Barry?" That there are some people that are just impossible to talk to. I learned the name of another one yet.
I don't think you can learn anything new. Like Stacey was bringing up the curiosity aspect, and every once in a while I like to go to woo-woo land and listen to people that are completely woo in order to get thinking that's out of my thinking. And then that leads me to other rational thinking, but they're thinking so outside of the box because it's not real. It's imaginary land.
Right.
But that imaginary land is really helpful to come into reality and science.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
As long as it's not gibberish. I have one correspondent who can write a very long tract that's just gibberish. You can't even diagram the bloody sentences, let alone extract any semantic content from it. And you basically can't have a constructive conversation with them because it's undecodable gibberish.
If you don't speak that language, if you don't speak imaginary language.
Well, I mean, I can't even diagram a sentence.
Yeah, because there's vocabulary words that don't make sense,
Yeah.
or they're
On the
used in a
other,
format
on
that
the other
doesn't
hand,
make
he can
sense.
draw a diagram that is amusing. When you talked about woo, he can draw a diagram that, in fact, I have it. I can give you the link to it if you want. But you know, he is so full of woo that he's diagrammed the diagram of woo.
Yeah, there's no logic to the woo.
No,
As long as there's logic to the woo, I can go with the woo. But
But
then when they, yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
I'm gonna say that there probably is a logic to his woo, or he wouldn't be able to come up with such a good diagram. It wouldn't work. I mean, in his model, that model is working.
well, offline, I'll give you a link to the picture of it. I'll
I
put it
want
in
to
the
look
chat.
at it, and Sam has his hand up.
I wanted to respond to your point, which was responding to Josh's point, which is he can have a very good model of the woo domain. That doesn't mean that he's got a good model of each of those woo. You know,
Right.
he can understand the woo meta. So that's a very key distinction.
Which is what I call metaphysics when people are talking about the physics of how God came into creation. And I was listening to a podcast, I'll just share it with you guys, a gentleman who says he can remember all his past lives. So in school, he was jogged into a memory of past lives and felt the emotions of being born in a different body and blah, 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 woo, woo, woo. But then his thinking of how that relates to this dimension. And then he went into this whole diatribe about 9 dimensions, 12 dimensions. What's the 5th dimension? Blah, blah, blah. And for me, it's a nice exercise of thought. Does that relate to what I understand in physics of different dimensions? And are those metaphysics even, you know, is there any kind of logic I can go to, and does it help me to create new logic? That's where I try to expand my thinking. Okay, let's, you know, make his axiom true. If this is true, then this would be that, and try to go into this woo world of axiomatic metaphysics. And that's where, to me, I sometimes solve some of my hardest science problems with that type of thinking. Like, I was trying to understand, does time exist in dimensions outside of this life? So meaning if you die and you're a spirit, does the time on Earth still calculate and affect the dimension that you're in? We all don't know what dimension you go to when you die, or if you even go anywhere, if it just ceases. So does that was the question I had. And I had a woo person tell me that their deceased husband came and contacted them and said they had to go away for a little while and they'll be back because they have to help souls transition because there's going to be a big earthquake in India. And it made me think, okay, well, if that person's telling the truth and they are talking to their deceased husband, then time does affect that dimension because they said they had to go away in this time dimension in order to help people, if that makes any sense. He said the spirit of the dead husband said they had to help the soul's transition that would be dying quickly because of the earthquake. And that would take a certain amount of earth time to do that. So that spirit would not be able to contact the wife for a couple weeks. So it made me think, oh, there is some sort of relation between the spirit world and, which is, how do we know if that's even the spirit of her dead husband or if that's just her consciousness? We don't know, but how would I know unless I talk to a spirit from another dimension? I've never done that. So, and even if I did, I would have to ask it to interact with this dimension. So those are the type of thought, you know, experiments I like to do when I'm talking to these. There's a whole, you know, millions and millions of woo people out there that have conferences and channel people. And there's a whole nother dimension of thinking that people would say, you're crazy, you're just making all this up. But then I read that book, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, and they had a certain documented case where someone took a psychedelic drug, had someone contact them while they were on the psychedelic drug, and then they took the phone number and the information from that contact and found it was a real person, and it was just too impossible to have them make that up. So there's things that need to be studied, I think, on the metaphysic level.
When you get an inspiration, where does it come from? Spira. Where does spirit? The word inspiration, you can be dreaming and an inspiration comes to you and you go, you have no idea where it comes from.
Well, sometimes it comes from Mafu, the spirit that channels and talks to you, and they name it and then tell them. I don't know.
I mean, Paul McCartney got sued for writing a song that was almost exactly like a song that he had heard, 10 or 15 years earlier when he was a youngster. And it was a song that I recalled having heard when I was younger. And yes, they were the same tune and had the same rhythm and the same everything. And it wasn't plagiarism. He was just had an inspiration to write this song. And he had no idea that there had already been a song that was essentially the same tune.
Well, that's subconscious plagiarism.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of inspiration comes from something you were exposed to a long time ago, and it's sort of buried in your deep memory, and it sort of floats up out of nowhere. You don't recall having learned it or where it came from. It's just, it's an inspiration, and you build on it. And is that plagiarism? Well, in that case, I think it went to court. And the question is, how similar does it have to be to an existing song to be legally called plagiarism?
Well, I'm under the axiom that everything exists all at once, always. We just haven't recorded everything yet. So as the internet grows and gets bigger, we'll realize that every song you've ever sung has been sung before. We just didn't record it 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, very likely. I mean, it is uncommon to hear a genre of music that you've never heard before. Now, every generation there is a new genre. And it doesn't sound musical when you first hear it.
Well, maybe if you're not in the music world, I think it's common in the music world to hear things you've never heard before, just because there's so much world music.
The Pachelbel's canon has a chord progression that is very, very common. And there's a send up of it. There's a guy who stands up and he plays you the chord progression of Pachelbel's canon, and then he goes through a whole litany of popular songs that have exactly the same chord progression.
Right.
And you don't realize that they're the same music until he plays them for you.
Yeah, I just posted in the chat a little bit back a company called Riff Fusion. So it's a takeoff on Stable Diffusion. And instead of diffusing an image to come into clarity, it's diffusing sound and music, just like an image or grooves on a record. It's really interesting to listen to. I put it in the chat. But I think there's only so many mathematically, like you're saying, this 20 questions game, there's only so many combinations of chord progressions. And to prove that, there was some information technologists that put them all onto a disk and tried to copyright it and patent it.
Well, that's one of the reasons, like things like Spotify or what, I can't remember the name of the other one, that if you select a song from a certain genre, it can recognize the genre and then suggest other songs that are of that same genre. It knows how to categorize an individual song within some, and radio stations, they all place, country western or whatever the genre is that they specialize in, and there are these pattern structures that can mathematically recognize a member of a genre.
Yeah, until you get to Frank Zappa. What the heck is that?
I haven't listened enough to his stuff to know what his stuff is called. It may be idiosyncratic for all I know.
I think it was just called alternative. I don't know what it was called at the time, alternative rock or something. But there's some people that just, like, I just heard an artist this week called Ren, R-E-N, and he has a song called Hi Ren. And he starts off with this beautiful classical guitar, and then he goes into hip hop, and then he starts screaming like punk rock, and then he goes into spoken word, and then he just talks. And the song, it's meshing, several genres. Yeah.
Well, Well, then there's
But it's-
fusion. That's what fusion is, basically taking two genres and merging them. And fusion
Mhm.
itself is not a genre in its own right. It's a process of taking any two genres and fusing them.
Yeah, and if you take three, what is that called?
Well, it's
Trifusion?
still called fusion. I don't know. Hyperfusion.
Yeah. Hyperfusion. There you go. Yeah. I think that's the key. But I mean, are we living in a hyperfusion world? I'm just throwing this out there to keep the conversation going. Are we all actually interconnected in ways ecologically, like mammal ecology of the human condition, where we don't even realize that we're all connected? So that's what we're learning as we travel through this path as a human, from a child to a adult.
I mean, look at what Chat GPT does. It culls material on a given topic or question from multiple sources and fuses them into a narrative, which will integrate maybe half a dozen sources that may never have, may have been all written independently. And that's a kind of a hyperfusion. If you ask it a sufficiently complex question, it will synthesize a narrative from multiple sources.
Yeah. And the hyperfusion of language is the fascinating thing right now, because they're saying I don't know, when I talk to my linguistic friends, there's so many languages on this planet, and I think they're dying off, on a daily basis. There's thousands, like languages that are spoken but not written, and people on this side of the mountain speak this version of this language. So in other words, we're all diffusing with our language models as humans to understand and extrapolate these narratives that have been going on for thousands of years through the lens of each language, each culture, tradition, language.
Look how English has been amalgamated from so many other languages. We've got French, we've got German, we've got some Latin, we've got some Greek. There's enormous conflation of words from so many languages in English, and the grammar and the sentence structure as a result is very irregular. Verbs are very irregular in English because they come from so many different sources. There's something like 300,000 words in English, and they didn't all come from one ethnic group. Some of it's Anglo-Saxon, a lot of it isn't.
How many constructs or metacognitive understanding could you break all of those words into?
Well, if you ever look up linguistic theory, you may have seen these charts that show
the
roots, Indo-European roots and all this kind of, and that's what you study in linguistics, is where do these words come from, the cross-pollination and the etymologies and all.
But there's so many branches that are not documented on that tree.
I mean, look at the very word alphabet comes from the Hebrew, aleph bet. That's the first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet are aleph and bet, alphabet. And in Greek, alpha beta. So, the name of the alphabet comes from the language where the first two letters were aleph and bet, aleph and beta, or alpha beta.
Yeah.
And people lose these etymologies. I think there's a lot of insight in etymologies which people lose sight of.
Yeah, well,
Did you freeze, or are you pensive? I think you froze. I think Joshua actually.
It looks like Josh is frozen.
Yeah, Josh is frozen.
Connection.
yeah,
Now
Josh is frozen.
Now you're back alive again. When you get to be pensive, it takes like 5 seconds to tell that you're not being pensive, that you're actually video.
Yeah, I'll keep moving my hand while I'm talking. I'll do the Italian thing. So, yeah, I'm just saying that there's a real understanding of DNA, and there's a lot of people that are going into this field to understand the entire history of human civilization.
Yeah.
And mapping all the DNA back.
Yep.
Which helps with the linguists. It really does. It really helps. And then if you go all the way back, what happens pre-Diluvian, before the flood, all the things that were wrecked? Like, what was the languages that were spoken or maybe they weren't even spoken. Maybe they were just non-speaking people that wrote things mathematically.
We certainly can look at animals which
Carve things into
communicate.
rock.
I mean, animals do communicate not in words like we use, but in sounds and in gestures. And
Mhm.
you can get a lot about, pre-verbal communication by looking at animals, especially apes and, monkeys and chimpanzees and whatnot. So,
Or birds.
or birds, yeah, bird songs. So you have lots of evidence of language other than what we would call modern human language. But we have the ability to articulate very precise phonemes. There's like 20 some phonemes that we can articulate, and so language is built out of those phonemes. Other animals don't have so many phonemes.
Yeah. And the language of slime mold. What is their language?
Good. Well, yeah, a lot of it's aromas. Aroma is a very powerful language in insects and other creatures, where the distance is very close. So pheromones and odors can carry quite powerful signals. And of course, it works in humans.
That's how
too.
dogs talk.
Yeah, dogs will have a very
Yeah.
possessive smell.
Yeah, I call the place where the dogs take a pee and all the other dogs smell. I call that doggy Facebook.
Pea book. Yeah, territory.
That's what it is. I mean,
marking your territory. Yeah,
they're checking the news feed.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the news feed of the day.
So
Who was here? Who peed on it?
and
But
we
yeah,
don't-
that's the point. That's the chemical communication. Who's studying those languages? I guess
well,
scientists,
the
hopefully.
biologists and the botanists, they do study animal communication and plant communication and insect communication, pheromones and all that kind of stuff. And the plants can signal each other with chemical signals.
Well, I think we need to evolve into a more universal communication so that we're communicating to each other the same way that plants do, the same way that birds do, same way that insects do. Like when I was listening to this woo-woo conversation, the gentleman said he had a psychedelic experience where he wanted to know what a bee feels like. And he actually became a bee and could feel the emotions of wanting to serve the queen bee and vibrate his wings at a certain level, which was quite woo, but it was interesting to think in those terms of what would it be like to be a worker bee serving a queen?
Yeah.
What would your existence and paradigm be?
How would you test a flight of fancy like that? I mean, you can certainly form all kinds of flights of fancy. There's no way to test them. At least I don't think there's a way to test them.
Well, I think you'd have to decode the bee language to a point where you could make a pre-trained language model of a
Well, they
bee
did.
and then ask the chat BTP.
They did decode the bee dance. They saw that the bee would come back after finding a field of flowers and do a waggle dance. And they did decode the waggle dance, determined it was the direction and the intensity of it, told you the distance and how far to that field of flowers that it found. Just two items,
Right.
A direction and a distance. It was mapped into which way the bee was pointing in the dance and how intense was the waggling.
But that's just for the flower. What about for the other communications in the beehive community?
That's yeah. The whole reproductive cycle of the bees and honey and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm sure that there's other forms of communication, but the waggle dance was interesting because you could actually observe it visually.
Right.
The other ones you have to be able to find the chemical substances that are exchanging the information. They figure out what they stand for. I think that's a little harder to do.
Yeah, but that's true information theory. I mean, that's.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's.
Feynman talks about that with ants, how ants follow a trail back to the food, and he did experiments with ants where he would disrupt the trail. There's a whole section in one of his autobiographies about playing with ants and studying, how they build up their information with what's the substance for I think it's formic acid is the substance that they lay down. And the formic acid basically it paints the trail. And formic acid has a property that it will persist for, minutes. And so you can build up a strong formic trail if enough ants follow it. And when the food supply is exhausted, then the formic acid evaporates and the trail evaporates. And there's this whole time dynamics of forming and dissipating these trails.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I want to study spiders because I've experienced watching 2 spiders play. And that was something that still I've only seen once in my life, but it was mind blowing to watch the spider come over, dangle on the web, signal to the other spider. I mean, I know there's documented in nature shows of spiders mating and that sort of thing, but I rarely see them playing. I've never seen a nature documentary of spiders playing, but I did see it in real life.
Yeah, mating dances in higher animals, birds and other creatures. There was a guy who did mating dances of the sand cranes in the Midwest. And he was trying to reestablish a breed where there was just like it had gotten down to, I think, 1 or 2 left in this colony. And they had not grown up. These birds had not been in their flock. And he was actually doing the mating dance with this one crane to try to teach it how to do a mating dance. And this was in one of these nature magazines. It was really funny to see this guy standing up and doing this whole mating dance with the sand crane.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I like martial arts, is because they try to mimic movements of animals in order to understand the energy.
Yeah, that and fencing, that's all part of, and the whole art of dance. I mean, my friend Anne Marie, she studied dance, and I can go watch a ballet or something, and I'm watching at a very superficial level. I'm not interpreting, the fine details of the dance and trying to make up a narrative of what it's conveying.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the evolution of like these apps like TikTok, is everyone's trying to signal their movement and speak in the language of movement as opposed to talking.
Yeah.
That's why the dance is so popular on that app.
Well, yeah. And there are people, I mean, my mode is written text. Most of my communication is written text, but for other people, it's spoken word or nonverbal communication. People just find whatever communication channel they're fluent in. And then they find the audience who can decode that, or at least can appreciate it.
Yeah,
I would produce music if I could. I just don't have any musical talent.
You haven't flexed that muscle. That muscle is atrophied, or it was never created.
Well, nobody in our family could carry a tune. And I mean, I think it was 4th grade, they gave us those plastic song flutes. Well, that was a waste of time. I mean, I just, possibly with the right context, I might have learned to play a song flute, but it was a lost cause. And when we tried to sing, I lip sync because I couldn't carry a tune. If I sang out loud, it would be awful. It would ruin the whole thing. I couldn't sing on key with everybody else, and I knew it.
Well, that's because you never practiced.
Well, that could be the reason, but I've tried to. I mean, even children's songs are very simple, like pentatonic scale and things like that. And I could sing along with my classmates on simple children's songs, which are not very intricate. But I wouldn't try to lead the song. That would be crazy. I would be way off key.
Well, you just have, I don't know. My experience, I was the same way, and I was told I can't carry a note and I suck and I'm horrible. And then I found myself on stage with 600 people, and I was just sitting with a group of people singing, and someone tapped us and said, "Go on stage. You guys sound great."
Yeah.
And now here I am with a microphone singing
Karaoke
to 600 people carrying a tune, and I'm going, "What am I doing? I can't sing."
Karaoke is notorious for people singing off key.
Sure.
And I know that if I would go up to try to do karaoke, that would be a disaster. Now, I could be in a group of people and I could sing, sub-vocally so that even the person next to me could barely hear it, and it would be, I'll be basically lip syncing. But if I try to carry a tune on my own, that would be a disaster.
Well, I think the key to getting to that point is to have something in your ear so that when you're off, you hear it on and you're trying to calibrate to what's in your headphones. So in other words, if you sing next to someone and try to harmonize with them, if you're off, they're kind of tuning you like an instrument, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand the concept abstractly.
Yeah.
Reducing it to practice is beyond my skill level.
Right. It's uncomfortable. I'm just saying, Barry, to have someone in your ear going, no, you're going, and they're going, and you're going, and then they're like singing in your ear. It's so weird. It's like very, very uncomfortable.
We just had the Chinese New Year, and there was this really funny bit on the PBS channel in San Francisco, where there was one of the staff was Chinese, and he was trying to teach the other staff who was American how to say Gung Hai Fa Choi. And so he would say Gung Hai Fa Choi. The guy would go back, Gung Hai Fa Choi. No. Gung Hai Fa Choi. Gung Hai Fa. No. It was really funny because you couldn't tell the difference. And yet, they were sort of making fun of the fact that tiny nuances changes the meaning.
Yeah, well, it's a tonal language. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tonal language. And so if you don't use the right tone of voice, you've said something different.
Yeah.
And, so I said to Sam Chan last week, Gung Hai Fa Choi, he says, that's pretty good. but I could only say it because I'd seen that funny station break on, what's the name of the channel? I've forgotten the name of the channel now. But Sam can probably tell me if I'm saying it bad. Gung Hai Fa Choi. How awful that actually is.
I actually don't say that myself because that's the Chinese way,
Is that Cantonese?
That
Cantonese way. And I always say it in Taiwanese, which is different.
Yeah.
In Taiwanese, it's Gyong Hee. Gyong Hee basically means congratulations or let's celebrate. Okay, that's literally what it means. Okay, Gyong Hee. But in Cantonese and Mandarin, they say something else.
Yeah. So I heard this thing, Gung Hai Fa Choi, Gung Hai Fa Choi. And I learned to imitate that as close as I could, but I never knew, whether it was passable Cantonese or not, or whatever dialect it was supposed to be.
They give you a pass, Mary.
Well, yeah, because I grew up in Omaha. Where
It's like me trying to speak Yiddish,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's another one is people try to do Yiddish and it doesn't sound.
I forgot to correct Sam when he said he put the cream cheese on the bagel. It's actually in Yiddish, it's schmear.
That's New York Yiddish, isn't it?
I would imagine that's where I picked it up from New York. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why in Einstein or Noah's, that's what they call it, right?
Schmear. Yeah, Einstein's is schmear. Bagel is schmear.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my advice. Don't try and take large amounts of cream cheese through TSA anymore.
I've sort of learned not to try to take any edible food on the airplane. Eat it in the waiting room or wherever you have to eat it before you go through whatever you have to.
No, but for long flights, it makes sense for me. Like I'm going to go to India. I'm not going to go there without some of my snacks.
Well, you have to read very carefully what you can take, the amount that you can take, like a bag of peanuts that's a certain size that's already prepackaged or whatever it is. But anything that is prepared at home, that's in a baggie that you take, chances are they're going to block it.
Well, there's a problem to solve right there. You could have a whole new food category of TSA approved foods.
Like kosher, it's got a little TSA instead of a K in a circle. It says, if this is got the right seal of approval, then you can carry this amount of it, and they'll let you through.
So for the record, there's a few times I went to Boston, and in the Boston airport, I believe there's a place that sells lobster rolls. So I'll get a lobster roll just before getting on the flight. And so rather than the little pretzels or peanuts or whatever, I'll bust out my lobster roll when everybody else is getting pretzels and peanuts. So that's how I'm going to enjoy my cross-country flight.
If you buy it in the concourse after you've gone through TSA, then there's no further checking.
Yes.
But you have to buy it at those rates.
Yeah.
you know, the Cinnabon or whatever it is at these super expensive rates, because you didn't have to go through the checkpoint with it.
Yeah, years ago, it was already like $20+.
And you better eat it on the airplane, because when you get off the airplane and go through customs, you can't take it out of customs.
I was just
You
coming
have to
back.
have eaten it before you landed.
Another
I'm
travel.
sure you'll find a hack. Yeah, I'm sure you'll find a hack, Sam.
I've had people in the waiting room offer me something that they bought and they didn't want, they couldn't eat the whole thing, and they say, I just bought this, I can't, we have to eat this whole thing, take half of it, please, you look hungry. And I've actually accepted, you know, a snack from somebody in a waiting room, because they realized that if it wasn't gone before they boarded the airplane, they wouldn't be able to take it aboard.
You guys have seen the meme that's I've posted and reposted multiple times. That at TSA, whatever they find that they consider dangerous, you have the option or the demand to toss it in this bin with every other item they have found that was potentially dangerous within feet of hundreds of people. That's how much sense it makes to take all this potentially dangerous stuff and put it in the same exact bin with all the other dangerous objects.
Bureaucracy
You know,
does not
it's just-
bureaucracy is not a thinking process. It's almost the antithesis of a thinking process. And that's one of the reasons that dogma is so awful, because a lot of dogma is really just bureaucratic rules made by the clerical bureaucrats that they're not going to teach you theology, so they're just going to give you some rules, you know, some rules, and that's what's handed off to the church members,
Yep.
the catechism.
Oh, so before the top of the hour, let me go on record. Next Saturday, unless you feel like posting a different link, Barry, or anybody else, there will be no
No session.
Saturday or Sunday session next weekend. Okay, because
At all.
I'm going to be
Okay.
in flight. I'm going to be in transit.
All right.
And at that time, I would actually start the session if I could, but I'm going to be in the air.
Yeah.
So
Well, what I can
Saturday,
do is-
Sunday, I'm not going to start it. So if you want to start it, you're welcome to post a link and start it. Okay.
My non-paid Zoom account only lets me have 40 minutes at a clip, although I can start a new session immediately. So if I start a session on my Zoom account, if somebody else shows up who has a paid Zoom account, we can switch to that. Otherwise, you have to restart every 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I'm too cheap to buy the paid account.
It's about $17 a month now.
Is it 70? That's a lot. See,
17. I think it's 17.
17. I hosted a group of people who all worked together in the 90s, and we used to meet in person for lunch every Wednesday, and because of lockdown, we switched to Zoom, and so I basically host it, but we have a station break every 40 minutes, so we go for 80 minutes and have a station break in the middle.
Well, I got to run down to Los Angeles. Thanks. I hope you have safe travels, Sam, next week. Good to see you, Stacy, Barry.
Yep. Everybody have a good, I guess I should say, have a good 2 weeks then. All right.
Yep.
And is there any reason to save the chat? I guess maybe so. I'll save the chat and post it.
Yeah, check out that Refusion, Sam. I think you might like the information theory and music. It's a fun thing to check out, especially as a classical musician.
So it's a link. Okay, I was probably one of the sessions, one of the things you posted. Okay, I see it.
Yep.
When I was
I think you
heating
might
up
like it.
and, making coffee and or tea.
Yeah,
I
it might
see.
entertain your guests while you're there. Just you can put in any music genre or anything, and it will just DJ for you and create it. It's fun.
Mhm.
Cheers.
Bye.